Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. This is a fully independent podcast. Now more than ever, independent media needs the support of listeners and viewers. Visit aroundtheempire.com to find out how to support the podcast, gain access to bonus content, and there's both audio and video versions of the show. Kit Clarenberg returns to the show, again with leaked documents related to information in psychological warfare. We discuss his Grayzone article titled Leaked Files Expose Syria PSYOPs Veteran AstroTurfing BreadTube Star to Counter COVID Restriction Critics. In this case, a state-sponsored influence operation was created to undermine critics of coronavirus policies, and they're covertly using at least one prominent YouTube personality as their media conduit for the elite establishment imperial narratives. In a bonus question, we talk about strategies for finding genuine media sources and channels. Kit Klarenberg is an investigative journalist who explores the role of intelligence services in shaping politics and perceptions. He's been published by numerous media outlets, including the Grayzone, Cradle, Electronic Intifada, RT, and more. Kit Klarenberg is here, back on the show. It's so great to talk to you again, Kit. Thanks so much for coming back on the show. And how you doing?
My pleasure. No, I'm doing very well, thank you. Very well. Yourself?
Doing pretty well. It's been a rough couple of months with some health issues, but I think I'm on the upswing.
Good to hear.
And I mean, it's tough for everybody. These are tough times for everybody for various reasons. And then it's the middle of winter here. It was like 15 degrees last night. So there's that. But anyway, you've got a lot of traction with your latest article at the Grayzone. And I'd love to talk to you about it. Now, first off, as I was telling you a little bit earlier, there are a lot of angles in this story. It's a fairly long article, but there are plenty of things that you could dig into even further that would be valuable for the audience. And one of the main subjects here is a group of people on YouTube that have the nickname BreadTube. And I'm not sure if most people listening to this podcast have any idea who they are. Like, I didn't know that much about them. I knew a little bit about them. So what I was telling Kit earlier is that I had watched a panel that he was on with Alex and is it Mila, his co-host, and Caleb Moffin, and they did a really good job of describing what BreadTube is. And Alex was kind enough to allow me to add a clip of some of that explanation. So I'm going to add that in here, Kit, so that we can focus on some other aspects of this article.
Sure.
And I'll add it here as sort of a background for the audience.
Yes.
Basically, I didn't know who BreadTube was. I don't follow this kind of internet world very much. But I was approached about 2 years ago by someone named Caleb Kane, who I'd never heard of. And he wanted me to have a debate with a guy named Destiny, who also his legal name is Stephen Bennell. I'd never heard of him either. So I asked around, my social circle, hey, does anyone know who this Stephen Bennell Destiny guy they want me to debate is? And people immediately said, whoa, you want to debate Destiny? And they showed me this guy had this huge YouTube channel, this huge following. He's a Twitch streamer. He plays video games and all of this. And I thought, okay, well, if this guy's a big deal. I watched a few of his debates and we had a debate and it went for about 2.5 hours. And a lot of people were like, wow, you did pretty well. I kind of wiped the floor with him. He didn't see it coming because I brought actual statistical data. We debated about socialism. He argued from the premise that socialism has never worked anywhere. I brought actual statistics about Cuba, about the Soviet Union, about China, about Venezuela, et cetera. And he had a very difficult time with that. So it was quite an interesting debate. And then immediately after that, I got sucked into this whole internet subculture that people refer to as BreadTube. And so I thought it was quite interesting, but I listened to a lot of these voices. And what I noticed was that while they were speaking as if they were full-on communists, full-on anarchists, full-on Marxists, their message was pretty standard, standard establishment politics. This obsession with labeling anyone on the left who is at all critical of the status quo to be somehow a secret right-winger, a secret Nazi, a secret red-brown Nazbol crypto-fascist or whatever. That was very odd, I found. Support for U.S. interventions around the world, attacks on the various governments around the world, and then this belief that socialism is just a you and your friends start a worker cooperative business together. And quote, socialism has nothing to do with the government. That's a really common BreadTube thing. I thought this is a very, very odd world. And then I noticed that not only do these folks get algorithmic boosting, I mean, their videos blow up, but on top of that, they're promoted in mainstream U.S. media, the New Yorker, the New York Times, NPR, various outlets promote BreadTube voices. I mean, does that happen? To mainstream media outlets just randomly highlight social media channels by teenagers? I mean, that's not particularly normal. And then to top it all off, I found out that behind the scenes, they're being advised by a very shady individual named Steve Haasen. Steve Haasen is the leading cult expert in the United States, and he's got quite a shady history. He was involved with something called the Cult Awareness Network during the 1970s, where if your legal adult child became a Scientologist or became a Mooney or a Hare Krishna or whatever, you could pay Steve Haasen and his associates thousands of dollars to go kidnap your legally adult child against their will. And he would hold them in a basement and in some cases, tie them up and quote unquote deprogram them and unbrainwash them. That's a little bit disturbing. And his associate, Ted Patrick, went to prison for 2 years for doing this. His other associate, Rick Ross, also faced extreme legal challenges. And his group, the Cult Awareness Network, was bankrupted by lawsuits because they had this practice of going around kidnapping people, which is pretty illegal. And then right after the January 6th Capitol riot, we saw Steve Haasen himself on CNN, on national television, saying that the whole country needs to be deprogrammed from Donald Trump. And then we saw AOC, our esteemed freshman congresswoman, tweeting out that she agreed with that. And there needs to be a national deprogramming effort against the alt-right. And all of that was a matter of connect the dots, right? And at that point, I said that BreadTube serves imperialism, that there's probably a section of the intelligence agencies and a section of the U.S., status quo in terms of wealth and power that is supporting their efforts. They consider Donald Trump and the alt-right to be kind of a threat to the status quo. So they want to bring forward some kind of deprogramming operation to move people away from the alt-right. Well, that's all well and good, except that at the same time that they're debunking a lot of the allegations of the alt-right, they're also trying to equate the alt-right with legit socialists and anti-imperialists and waging campaigns against Max Blumenthal, against Grayzone, against RT, against Jimmy Dore, against anybody who legit believes in socialism and is actually opposed to their regime change wars and interventions. So that all led me to write a book.
So that's what BreadTube is all about. But there are some sort of very familiar topics and some players in this story that I'd like to focus in on. Maybe not all the players, since there are a lot, but there are some main players here. And so let's talk first of all, let's talk first about the documents. So
Sure.
You got some documents from someone. And
yeah, I mean, I think that I think the key thing here is that I actually was somewhat unaware of BreadTube, although in the spirit of cosmic coincidence, a few weeks before these came into my possession, a friend of mine introduced me to Philosophy Tube, which is an online it's a YouTube channel starring Abigail Thorne, a former actor, who she kind of tackles various political, philosophical topics in often a very kind of all you're using ornate kind of visual effects and sound effects. They're often kind of rather long-winded, but I found them quite entertaining. I thought the production values were extremely high for
definitely
I could kind of completely understand how she has 1.2 million or maybe more now, followers on or subscribers on YouTube, and a vast amount of paying Patreon subscribers. I think that so it was rather spooky when these came into my possession, that she was at the forefront of this. But essentially, in brief, this was a proposal for a kind of communications campaign run by this organization in the UK called the Royal Institution, which is this very kind of stuffy elite organization, which it seeks to kind of promote British scientific prowess, and it was. It's always had royalty and kind of landed gentry at its highest levels. The Prince Charles, who's next in line to the British throne, is its long-time patron, and he is someone who's spoken recently about condemned recently conspiracy theories surrounding COVID vaccines, and it also recently received a large amount of money from the UK government's COVID Culture Recovery Fund, which was earmarked for video production specifically. I would say just as well, over the course of the pandemic, the Royal Institution has published regular videos on science, and kind of these these Zoom roundtables on various topics, and its kind of web footprint has gained significantly. I think the average kind of person in the UK, let alone kind of overseas, probably haven't heard of the Royal Institution before, and indeed only a few years ago they were in serious financial trouble and were having to sell off these kind of priceless first edition works by eminent British scientists like Darwin and Isaac Newton, and which led the kind of the BBC, the British state broadcaster, to ask whether the organization was on the verge of outright bankruptcy and collapse. But it seems.
Where does the funding come from? The government or the royals? Or okay.
It seems to come from donations and grants from various sources, but
maybe philanthropists too, or
and it also rents out to kind of very grand central London headquarters for corporate events and weddings and all these other things. But it seems to have been struggling until it started getting hundreds of thousands of pounds from the UK government, from the UK government, but also really quite strikingly, this specific campaign which it was running, it's called Challenging Pseudoscience. This is the operation outlined in the documents.
And when does that start?
It started in February 2021, so it's almost a year ago now. It appears to be receiving generous support, quote unquote, from the Open Society Foundation, which is run by the rather controversial billionaire George Soros, who's been linked to regime change operations in the former kind of communist sphere, and funds all manner of
Mr. Color Revolution,
absolutely, funds all manner of initiatives, kind of social initiatives and NGOs the world over, including the US. But so essentially what this this outline included in the document stated that the Royal Institution was going to start publishing regular content on quote unquote anti-vax conspiracy theories. And it was a two-phase strategy. The first phase was going to include an extensive survey of people online to try and identify why people believe kind of quote unquote dangerous things about about vaccines, or indeed are critical of lockdown restrictions, and then build up detailed information on them, and understand their quote unquote psychosocial drivers, and then this research would be used to craft a communications campaign trying to counter these conspiracy theories, which would be fronted by Abigail Thorne, philosophy tube. She was going to front it, but this was going to be completely secret. So there's going to be no public acknowledgement that any video or media appearance that Abigail made about anti-vax or conspiracy theories around the pandemic would disclose the fact that she was being funded and supported in all of this by the Royal Institution, and indeed this rather this rather shadowy communications firm Valent Project, who was this is the firm that crafted this approach. And what's interesting is Valent was founded by an individual called Amil Khan, who for many years was involved in British government psyops in Syria. The purpose of and these were, it's really quite amazing. I mean, this is all in the public domain and has been for many years now, but people still fall for atrocity propaganda emanating from Syria. So I mean, these were funded to the tune of millions and millions of pounds every year. And the overriding objective was to destabilize the government of Bashar al-Assad. You convince Syrians, Western citizens, foreign governments, international bodies, rights groups that the kind of violent militant factions tearing Syria apart were actually the kind of moderate rebels, legitimate alternative to the government. And it was flood media the world over with pro-opposition propaganda. And so this is the key, and the key thing to consider here is that along the way, scores of Syrians were trained to effectively propound pro-regime change key messaging to Western news organizations and produce slick video and audio reports for domestic and overseas consumption.
And can I just mention that a lot of times this was news or information that was coming from areas that were not safe for independent journalists or other Western journalists to even go into. So a lot of times they had a lock on all the information coming out of particular areas.
Yeah, and I mean, it placed these companies in extremely close quarters with the most kind of violent. We're talking about like Al Nusra. Like you've got British communications contractors, most of whom have a history in the security and intelligence services, rubbing shoulders with Al Nusra. Right? I mean, it's just what can be more suspicious than that. But I think just quickly as well, that there was a couple of years ago, an internal Whitehall review of these efforts in Syria was leaked by Middle East Eye, and it showed that British government ministers concluded that all these kind of propaganda initiatives in Syria were poorly planned, probably illegal, and cost lives. And it's like, well, I mean, what do you expect when you're, co-opting locals, and indeed, running PR for the most kind of violent groups imaginable, who are responsible for hideous atrocities, murdering women and children. I mean, it's nothing good can come of this, but they kept at it. But I think that the key thing to bear in mind when discussing this communications campaign is that it created this self-perpetuating feedback loop. So secretly Western trained and funded opposition assets on the ground, whether they are opposition fighters or anti-regime activists, they were trained and funded to produce these heart-tugging atrocity propaganda videos, clips, and reports based on real and staged events. This content was then fed to very dubious US and UK government funded organizations like Bellingcat, which legitimized this. And then these same actors were interviewed by NGOs and mainstream media outlets, and their tales of woe and the shocking images they produced were broadcast the world over without criticism or challenge, whether they were true, embellished, or outright fraudulent. I mean, something that I will get into in a subsequent article down the road, but you're hearing it here first, is the fact that what's even more shocking is that one of the companies involved in the kind of British companies involved in this PSYOPs effort was a company called Intifada, which employed Amil Khan, who's the founder of the Valent Project. But they, in one of the documents in my possession, Intifada refers to how they created and managed Amnesty International's Syria campaign. So this is, you have a PR, a firm running PR for armed groups in Syria, which is also helping a apparent human rights NGO with their PR and communications.
Yeah, there were some strange things with Syria. Some of my most trusted organizations, many times I was like, what the heck are you doing? The Doctors Without Borders, they had people on the ground who I guess they had to work through them, and and also Amnesty, and so that's interesting.
I do think that there's I mean it's a real shame, because I think that Amnesty International it's not perfect, but I mean it is a very, very, very important and organization, which it did to a certain extent, at least at one time it seems, have a high degree of autonomy and unlike Human Rights Watch, which has always been an effective wing of the US state, and in reinforcing the imperial narrative. But I think it's just gone to the point now where it's just like, can it ever be trusted again on any issue? And it's like, the Valent and shockingly Valent Project counts Amnesty International as a client, and in on its website, and it states on its own website it states that Valent trained activists for Amnesty facing brutal authoritarian regimes to be more effective on social media. And again, that has clear shades of this campaign for the Royal Institution, where it's like you have all of these people who are allegedly grassroots independent speakers voicing their allegedly legitimate opinions, who are actually reading off a script that's been prepared for them by a regime change operative. And it's like I think that's the really frightening thing. And more generally, during the pandemic, I think that we've no doubt seen an enormous amount of this. I think there's been a huge amount of kind of online information campaigns run by, say, British Army 77th Brigade, which is this kind of online. It's they call it like an online battalion. It's like a network of fake and real accounts publishing pro-government messaging, attacking critics, and I mean, we know that this is actually a recurrent UK government strategy, and no doubt it's happening in the US too, that these PSYOPs contractors will maintain these clandestine networks of social media influencers to promote particular messages. So for instance, there's a company called Zinc Network. I believe that we discussed them in the last time I appeared on this show, and they are involved in all manner of kind of clandestine skullduggeries, secretly trying to manipulate and influence the British public, but also countries all over the world. Interestingly, they now count the World Health Organization as a client, so quite what they're doing for them is really it's probably nothing good. But we know from various leaked files that Zinc has a large number of effective agents on the ground who are pumping out messages which are fed to them. They have a team in London who help YouTubers secretly craft scripts, and then they promote this, and they edit their videos to make sure that they're slick and engaging. And it's just like it's to the point, it's like what can you trust at this point? And this is particularly relevant to consider because the way that narratives around the pandemic have shifted is nothing short of extraordinary. And of course, this is a allegedly new and little understood virus. So of course, that's kind of science is an ever evolving body of understanding, which will change over time. But then equally, it's like there are so many things which at the start of this were unsayable, which are now kind of mainstream accepted gospel. If you look at all of this, all of the discussions around the origins of of COVID, for instance. Like, we were told at the very start it was a nonsense, insane conspiracy theory to suggest this emanated from a lab. Then when there started to get political momentum behind the idea that it was, or at least potentially was, a lab leak, and suddenly this stops being unsayable, and you stop being an insane conspiracy theorist for suggesting it. And then, it is kind of weaved back and forth. And then now you have, fairly prominent and indeed credible scientists saying it's the most likely explanation, and all these other things. But it's
they're
like,
not in lockstep anymore.
People got banned from social media forever at the start of this for suggesting it, and then now it's like, an acceptable point of view. And I think that's really quite frightening. And I think that more generally, one of the things that I find really sinister about this this kind of secret campaign featuring Abigail Thorne. Abigail may well be a good faith actor in this. She might not have known what kind of darker purposes she was serving by doing this. But there has been an ongoing effort to frame, from the very start of the pandemic. I mean, we're talking like, April 2020 and probably before, to frame any and all criticism of government's handling of the pandemic, and any and all opposition to restrictions, or questions about whether whether even vaccine mandates are an acceptable thing, as inherently extremist, potentially leading to violence. And you have this. There's a British, sorry, but he's working for British University. There's an academic called Stefan Lewandowski, who has emerged as kind of expert on conspiracy theories and disinformation, but who has a kind of history of publishing rather dubious claims himself about all sorts of kind of alternative viewpoints. And he recently said that people who've been exposed to anti-vax content online will need to be de-radicalized as if they've come out of a cult or a terror group. And it's like, really? This is completely insane. Like, this is,
like re-education camp territory.
No, absolutely. And it's like, it's all framed, it's all part of this wider push against, quote unquote,
it may not be a physical building, but
it's all part of this wider push that's been ongoing for years. And they've shifted their focus to, first it was Russian disinformation, and then it's Chinese disinformation, or it's right-wing disinfo. That all of these are allegedly sources of radicalization and super dangerous, and you're being exposed to unacceptable thoughts and evidence and perspectives which you have to be saved from, and the governments are the only people who can do this. And I think that in Sweden recently that they launched, without, it was very little fanfare, although it's increasingly being endorsed in the Western media, that Sweden launched what they call the Psychological Defense Agency, where it's all about defending the Swedish public from like Russian
influence operations from other places,
alleged influence operations. And then this led recently to there's this individual called Elizabeth Braw, who's kind of bounced from dubious think tank to dubious think tank. She was part of the Atlantic Atlantic Council. She's now part of the American Enterprise Institute, and she's rabid neocon organization. And she published an article in the Financial Times the other day saying the best way to counter disinformation is via psyops, i.e. it's best to counter disinformation with more disinformation. And and I think that we could probably consider at this point Sweden to be a laboratory for this, or it's kind of, it's a test site, and then whatever comes of this, it will be claimed as a success, and then it will be implemented in other countries. And then when this government department was announced, it was repeatedly stressed, this does not amount to government censorship of the internet, or the government dictating what's acceptable and what isn't. And then I think it actually is. That's what it's going to amount to, is saying that, like, okay, well, believing, say, I don't know, the Iraq war was an illegal war of aggression. This is disinformation. You've been misled. You've been manipulated.
Exactly.
Actually, it's gonna all be all about reinforcing elite, established imperial narratives.
Yeah, that's what it all boils down to.
And this is the purpose of BreadTube. And I think, I was actually not particularly familiar with this kind of, phenomenon, and I feel all the better for it. But I mean, one of I forget what it was now. I think it was a few months back at least. But Vaush, who's one of these bread tubers, who I saw excerpts of an interview that he did with the kind of the prominent left wing, if you can call him that, journalist in the UK, Owen Jones. And then over the course of this podcast, Vaush came out with all of these arguments, which just seemed, to use an analogy, it seemed like a lawyer who had a client he knew to be guilty of serious crimes, who was charged with coming up with the most ludicrous arguments for why he was innocent. And so, he claimed, oh well, we actually, America allowed imperialism to happen in Syria by not stationing more troops there. And so it's just like, it's
where have we heard that before?
Yes, and it's just like it just very much seemed to be that he was framing what was, lockstep, unquestioning support for empire,
and at the same time he's claiming to be, a great socialist and an anarchist and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, and it's all about it's all about actually reducing to almost zero the spectrum of acceptable opinion and thoughts, and so
policing and narrative,
policing narrative, and saying that, like, well, okay, well, this is acceptable and this is because you're allowed to believe this, but you're not allowed to believe this because. And I think that it's like Caitlin, the great Australian writer Caitlin Johnson has discussed at length in respect of Julian Assange, say that you have a situation in which when Julian was arrested and jailed in Belmarsh, where he now resides to this day, God bless him, absolutely horrific. It's just suffering each and every day in solitary confinement for having exposed war crimes, absolutely disturbing. But anyway, the point is that she made a very compelling argument that effectively what this what's happened is that the media has published all of these different arguments for why it's a good thing that he's in jail. If you're an anti-deep state kind of independent journalist, well, Julian actually helped the Russians, so it's a good thing that he's in jail. Or, oh, Julian Assange is a misogynist and rapist, so it's good that he's in jail. But then once and on and on and on. But then when you strip away this narrative soundtrack, actually these are all arguments. What it boils down to is it's a good thing that he's in prison. There's no differentiation, and it's the same. I think it's the same with we saw this with all of the different arguments made in favor of the Iraq War, or generally American wars of conquest more generally, that it's a good thing because we're taking down a dictator. It's a good thing because we are
weapons of mass destruction, weapons in the hands of terror. We're defending women's rights, and it goes on and on and on. But then when you strip it all away, this is all of these different quote unquote arguments are basically just supporting the fact that it's a good thing that this war goes ahead. And that's what makes this story would be intriguing even without this element. But the fact that the same people who are selling us war are now out there, they're warriors against quote unquote pseudoscience, which from my experience is not pseudoscience. Some of the things they're fighting against, it's actually factual stuff. People get banned for publishing public health documents and things like that. It's just not the right time or whatever. But that is a very interesting aspect that I want to focus on, or make sure that we make that point. And I think that's really, really good, the way you have pulled this together. I'm sure that you when you made that connection, you were probably shocked by it too. But let me dig a little bit more. Let me go back to the document
Sure.
and then work our way up, because as you mentioned, with BreadTube, I mean, it's possible the way these things get layered and different cutouts and third parties and things, it's possible that the talent, the people who have built up credibility, I mean, I don't know, did they get help from the beginning, or did they start with an organic small audience and work their asses off, like most independent media have done, work on shoestring budgets and all that. I don't know, but clearly the one thing they call the YouTubers, podcasters, whoever, writers, they call them influencers. So their value to these organizations is the fact that their credibility, their trust, the audience that they have, that's what's being bought. And their influence, because, and frankly, if you end up in tatters after it's all over, they don't care, they just buy somebody else with influence, with credibility, because the thing they're lacking, especially now, and you can see this from the World Economic Forum, I think their focus this year, maybe their whole year, is trust, is regaining the public trust, because that's what they have burned to the ground, is trust and credibility. And so whatever group of people they need to get through to people, since they don't have the trust, no one trusts them on their own. I'm talking about the elites and authorities that have been corrupted, or many people see it that way. I agree with them. That's the thing that they're after. And so the documents themselves lay out, is this like a contract, or is this a plan?
It's an outline, and and it's full of all of this, it's full of all of this language, which is, I think that one of the reasons this article blew up is that because Abigail Thorne's channel is presented as so independent, grassroots, and natural. I think that when people start reading in this document that, like, oh, actually, well, this video was intended to quote unquote achieve a measurable cognitive shift in the targeted audience, which is a bit like, oh right, like people don't realize the extent to which they're being manipulated. And it's like, a very good friend of mine, he Tom Secker, he runs the website Spike Box. I recommend Tom. Everyone I recommend everyone check it out. I mean, it's just it's extraordinary research, and he was someone who
definitely
is someone who very much worked his ass off, and is uncorruptible, but he has uncovered all of these documents related to the impact of the intelligence services and the Pentagon on Hollywood cinema, and indeed kind of popular TV shows. And one of the things that's really striking is that the by token of collaborating or offering kind of consultancy on, say, a film or TV show, the Pentagon gets line by line, a power to edit scripts, and they can remove things that paint them in an unflattering light, or hot reference issues that they don't like, for instance, say like PTSD and military veterans, and then they also can insert all manner of things which they further their interest. And so there is a just to take one example, there's a film, I forget when it came out now, but it's called Lone Survivor, and I think it did very well, both financially and in terms of the number of people who saw it. It was about 2013. Anyway, it was based on this autobiography by a veteran of Afghanistan, and he was a Navy SEAL, and essentially the Pentagon had complete control over the script. They trimmed out all manner of references to war crimes, and how awful it was for all of the people involved. But then they also did their absolute level best to promote the US military in the best possible light imaginable, which is kind of understandable when you have total control to do so. Of course you would do that, but anyway, the point is that an internal Pentagon appraisal of this said, oh, well, this is fantastic. What we've created here is a 2-hour infomercial for the Navy SEALs that people will pay money and optionally sit through. And it's like, I think that people don't realize that there are so, this is the view that is taken of so many of government involvement or covert and overt in almost anything, is that it's viewed as in terms of as a weapon of war. It's viewed as a manipulating the public is a good thing. And
did you ever think about? Did you ever give any thought as to how much money has been spent or is regularly spent on influence operations? And in some cases, it's not measurable because, I've never seen anything like it with this pandemic thing. This is the biggest. The wars, the propaganda efforts and how broadly, and I guess our election campaigns too. Those are crazy as well, but like the media coverage, I don't even know how to put a dollar figure on how many how many hours they get in propaganda time, but the amount of money that is spent it just has to be some shocking number.
Yeah, but this is another thing as well, is I think that quite a lot of people kind of understandably would say, oh well, advertising doesn't affect me, and it's just like, well, if it was if PR and advertising,
it's embedded in everything.
Why is billions spent on this? Well, if it didn't work, at least on some level,
exactly.
If it was completely ineffective, then all of this money would not be spent on it day in and day out. And I think that there's all sorts of stuff that's really jumped out to me across the during the pandemic. And I think that I mentioned Sesame Street earlier, Sesame Street has now receives funding from Open Society Foundations and the charitable division of Johnson & Johnson, and Bill Gates, and all of these other people who have this massive financial and ideological interest in the pandemic. And it cut to, there's the Christmas special recently where Elmo was telling kids to remain socially connected but physically distanced, and Big Bird's getting double vaxxed and he's saying this is great because I can go to parties now, and there's all this stuff, but then there's hilariously, there was sinisterly, there was a World Economic Forum podcast around this time where one of a representative of the foundation that runs the Sesame Street was featured, and they told the WF that oh well, actually that this is the pandemic has created an enormous amount of opportunity to profit for a large number of people, and said this is a good thing. And it's just it's interesting just how open and candid this is. Of course, no one ever notices, but because there's an enormous effort to suppress all this stuff.
I know it's
Excuse me, sorry, but I think that in respect of this project outline, I think that it's
I can read the background here. It says Valent Projects is a digital, this is the background section. Valent Projects is a digital communications company that focuses on social impact. Based in West London, the company has conducted extensive research and implementation work in the area of disinformation with a capital D and malign influence in the UK and abroad, including 3 bullet points: researching the spread of 5G conspiracy theories for the submission to a parliament inquiry; 2, investigating the use of disinformation in the 2019 UK general election campaign; and 3, investigating disinformation and supporting newly democratized governments deal with the phenomenon, and that in parentheses for US aid. And so this is Valent is the company that has direct contact with the bread tuber. Well, this one bread tuber, possibly other. I think this is probably not the only one, but
no.
Yeah.
I mean, I would imagine that. Yeah, I think that Valent is the is the kind of cutout here that's directing things. I mean, it's just it would be shocking to me if this was the only person who was being ginned up to do.
But does the bread tuber ever see this document itself?
But
we don't know, I guess.
Potentially yes. Although I mean, maybe it wouldn't be. Maybe it wouldn't be spelled out in such kind of blatant terms. I mean, I have, of course, contacted her, Abigail's agents, and asked for comment and received no response, which is pretty common. I'm finding, just more generally. I mean, often it must be said, as you kind of added a caveat. That Abigail might be a good faith actor in this. That a lot of the time these people do not know. How the extent to which they're being manipulated. They don't know the malign purposes to which their involvement is being.
Yeah, because of the layers, they don't know what it may go back to.
Yeah, and it's I mean, we discussed the last time I was on this podcast,
right?
Kind of the Zinc Media, Zinc Network, who that a lot, they will specifically engage layer upon layer upon layer of. What would you call it? Separation, in order to obscure the UK government's ultimate role. So they will set up a fake charity that works with a real charity, which then approaches people to be part of a communications campaign. And it's just it's very, very, very insidious. It's this total infection of civil society, and that kind of alleged Chinese wall that's meant to exist between state and non-state entities. And it's just getting to the point now where I don't think there's actually, a lot of the time there's no real meaningful, there's no meaningful distinction between in theory non-state actor and a state one, because at this point the government knows that for a good reason a lot of people don't trust. Governments know that a lot of people don't trust them.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's why they need to co-opt civil society voices, or present people as genuine grassroots what's the word? Genuine grassroots elements. And I think as well though that the media is so complicit in this. They surely they must know that it's a facade. So it's if you look at Syria, in future there will be enormous books written about the ways in which people were manipulated, and on this. But I think I'm not sure if your listeners remember, but a few years ago there was this Twitter account on Twitter which allegedly belonged to a 7-year-old child.
Yes, yeah.
Called Bana Alabed. And it was just it was just absolutely extraordinary that there's this alleged 7-year-old child kind of tweeting, and who was dubbed by the media as Syria's Anne Frank, who's allegedly a resident of Aleppo, who was calling for World War III.
Deleted that tweet later, but
yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, as well you might, and then got a book deal and all this stuff. It was obviously stupid, it's just obviously not true. And then they were she was interviewed on the CIA. This all of these tweets were written in perfect English language. But then she's interviewed on TV and then she can't answer basic questions because why would she? Because she's a 7-year-old girl living in Syria.
Yeah, it's just completely manipulated.
And it's no one asked the question. It's just obvious questions is this person for real? It's just so stupid. It boggles the mind actually, just how gullible people and indeed the media are. And it's just and I would suspect that in terms of, people like Emil Khan would have been absolutely, were fundamental to this kind of stuff, because they would have used their contacts in the media to say, oh, they're kind of their friends. He's an ex-journalist himself who worked for Reuters and the BBC, would approach, some pals and say, oh, do you fancy conducting an interview with this person I know on the ground in Aleppo? They're great. And then, this alleged civil society, kind of anti-regime activist in Aleppo would be interviewed by this prominent Western journalist and would be reading from a script that Emil Khan had prepared for them. Yeah, exactly. And then this would be presented as, voices of the occupied or whatever, kind of.
And that's exactly how that little girl was used. I think she became most prominent when the Syrian, Russian, Iranian coalition was trying to retake. They were in the process of retaking Aleppo, and then there were certain sections where it came down to like the last bastion, and the purpose of the people using that little girl was to stop that effort of taking that last bit of Aleppo, because they were expressing how much fear. There were little videos of, like, I remember the mother, the kids, little kids, one of them was, I don't know, 3 years old, right up against a window when there's bombing outside. And like, as a mother, I know that my kids would not have them anywhere. I'd have them in the most, protected part of the building that I was in. I mean, it's just, certain things to me, were very obvious, but it was clever, and it appeared to convince a lot of people. And then, of course, you don't know that, right? Because you see the tweets, and then you see all the reactions to it, and there's all these emotional, oh my God, you don't know how many of them are real people either. So it's just it's very, very frustrating. But
I mean, I do think in general that, like, I mean, you make a good point. It's just like, I just think that Twitter is just, it's gotten just worse and worse and worse over time. And I do think that there needs to be a concerted effort, and, like, I mean, irrespective of whether on the right or left, like, in kind of non-mainstream, anti-establishment, independent alt circles, there needs to be a kind of what's the word? There needs to be a discussion and an agreement to all get off these platforms and migrate to an independent, or a vaguely independent one, because it's so naked now. Like, Twitter's very open about the fact that it, and indeed as is Facebook, that they penalize and suppress and game their platforms to ensure that genuine alternative viewpoints and information sources are suppressed. They openly ban, they brazenly ban people for literally no reason. And it's like, Facebook has an ongoing relationship with the Atlantic Council to decide which allows this NATO offshoot, which is funded by arms companies and various Western governments, what's real and what's not. And then and they also have a dedicated threat intelligence unit, which is staffed by former NSA and Pentagon and CIA spies, which does the same job as well. And then and they routinely will delete, say, a popular page that for instance documents police brutality in Philadelphia, say. And it's like, well, why have they done that? Well, it's because there's highlighting facts that elites don't want highlighted, and they keep on doing this. And I think that a pal of mine who your listeners may be familiar with, a guy called Primo Radical. His channel, I think he makes some really good videos to get some great guests on, and it's very much like worth watching. It was quite amazing, actually. Back in December, I was actually on the verge of having going on his show, and then then this happened. But in late December, he kind of posted on Twitter saying, we need to get off these sites before we're all banned, because then we need to do this as part of a kind of unified, concerted effort. And then literally the next day, his YouTube channel was banned. And he's now, that's years of work that he spent building that up, just destroyed. And he's like now looking for, which is just absolutely shocking and egregious. And, now, and he's, now having to look for an alternative, and, all these things, it just goes on and on and on. And it's just like, this is going to keep happening, and it's, it won't all be concerted. It will be drip by drip, some of these people, like Fiorella Isabella, who she's part of Convo Couch, like she got banned without warning. She's been done some fantastic on the ground reporting of elections in
definitely.
In Latin America. So that's why she was removed. Of course, there is no other reason for it. And I think that it's just gonna. Luckily she managed to get back on it, but it's just like, but then how much longer has she got left? Probably not very long. I don't think any of us do. And I think that that these platforms now are openly gamed by state-backed bots and trolls and informal networks like Integrity Initiative, who all kind of publish the same things. It creates this echo chamber and whatever. And it's just like the tiniest deviation from the established line on things, and you will be attacked. You will be by armies of people. Your content will be deprioritized, to use an Orwellian phrase, by algorithms. You won't be able to cut through to people. No one will see your tweets or your posts and whatever. And it's just like,
we've seen this coming from. In fact, right after the 2016 election, it became pretty clear what was going on. And so, I'm in the process of preparing my entire archive to upload to one of these platforms. I think it's going to be Odyssey, but I'm already on Rockfin. I've already got an account set up on Rumble as well, even though that's not like my natural habitat. But we realize that we have to decentralize. We have to do mailing lists and things like that as a defensive effort. But I guess the bright side is, look at the efforts look at the lengths that they're going to shut people up. So I take that as almost an optimistic thing, at least temporarily, because of course we don't know how this all ends up. But that also will isolate us from the area where this audience has built up over the past decade or more. YouTube, just so many viewers. So there's that, but I don't know. We just have to hope that people find their way to other platforms. Twitter is a particular tragedy in my view, because I've been on it for so long, and it was literally maybe the most amazing communications tool I've ever in history, and when it was
I think it's like I think when you use it as a kind of micro blogging platform, I think it's fantastic. And I've been able to, I particularly enjoyed posting multi-tweet kind of investigations and stuff, the kind of thing which I wouldn't put in, maybe there's not enough there for an article, but stuff that's worth drawing attention to, and in kind of almost episodic form. I think at this stage I'm pretty much shadow banned. People don't see don't see what I post, and also I suspect that the kind of things that I talk about and write about are in themselves, just on principle, they are subject to shadow banning and kind of de-gaming and whatever, which is just, it's just absolutely, I think just to bring us back to like the pandemic, it's just extraordinary to me that there's, I would imagine that, and I think you saw this in the UK where as I said, 77th Brigade ministers have admitted that it's been deployed at various different times over the course of the pandemic to, quote unquote, battle disinformation. But I would suggest that it's there to publish pro-government, anti-lockdown critic, anti-vaccine hesitant information. And what's really interesting is that throughout the year, there, I mean, well, at least 2020, this is very apparent. There were clear spikes in activity. So it was like when towards the end of the summer / the start of the autumn, the UK government was committed to, not locking down again. And there was an enormous amount of pressure for them to do so from, various sections of British society and the media and political party. But they were refusing to. I think there's international pressure as well. They specifically ruled it out. And then, there was a profusion of these rather kind of, fairly obviously, bot or troll accounts who were publishing identikit pro-government anti-lockdown messages saying like, oh, Boris Johnson's a man of the people. He won't let us down. He won't lock us down, blah, 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 blah. And then when the government was kind of pressured one way or another into a rather embarrassing U-turn on this in kind of November, suddenly, often the same accounts started saying, we need to do this, like, anyone who opposes restrictions is a lunatic, like, blah, 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 blah. It's just very, very naked. So it's just like, what's trending at any particular time will be what powerful people want to be trending.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of we've mentioned a couple times the previous podcast that we did together, you and me and Muhammad Almazi. I'll link that in the show notes for anybody who missed that and wants to go back to. And also these documents in the video version of this, I will put up, I'll put these documents, on the screen so you can read it.
Yeah.
But for people who are listening to the audio version, let me just read the second part of this one part of the document. I read the background part, and then here's the overview part. It's just 2 paragraphs. It says, Valent Projects is proposing a 2-phase project designed to curb the influence of pseudoscience material online, with special emphasis on the coronavirus-related anti-vaxxing sentiment.
Yeah.
The project ultimately seeks to develop an understanding of the psychological drivers behind the generation and spread of anti-vaxxer narratives, which will also be relevant to broader pseudoscience narratives, and use this and then the other part is, and then use this understanding to develop and test public messaging responses. The findings from this project can be used to inform other programming by challenging pseudoscience, in caps, and that's a podcast, I guess.
The challenging pseudoscience is this
let me
wider.
I'll just finish reading real quick. Inform other programming by challenging pseudoscience at the RI, as well as other stakeholders, including the science community and concerned governments and public health bodies. The first phase of the project will comprise research, both online and ethnographic. The second phase will focus on using the insight provided by the research to design an intervention in collaboration with YouTuber Abigail Thorne, who runs the highly popular channel Philosophy Tube. So, it's a 2-stage project. First, gather a whole bunch of information. Oh, I meant to ask you, ethnographic, is that interchangeable with demographic? Is that the word that's used in the UK? Or
it's I guess it's probably, but it's effectively, yeah. But I mean, I guess this kind of it refers to kind of culture, kind of peoples and cultures with, in respect of their kind of customs and habits and stuff. So it's like you're doing an ethnographic investigation of, say, indigenous tribes in Ecuador, say. Yes.
Yeah. So Valent, can you talk a little bit about, I just want to make sure we tie these names together, we don't confuse people. So Valent.
No, there's an awful lot of names, it's true.
I know. So who is Valent again? If you would just quickly explain that, who they are.
Okay. So I mean, yeah. So yeah. I mean, it's like listeners are entirely forgiven if they're a bit lost at this point.
Well, hopefully they're going to read the article and then listen to the discussion.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's there's that quote. What a deadly web we weave when we practice to deceive. Yeah. Essentially, So Valent is a private communications firm which was founded in 2020 by this individual Amal Khan, who
Right.
worked for a variety of Foreign Office contractors, including Incostrat, which was founded by the then future wife of James the Measurer, who founded the White Helmets, and also this veteran military intelligence PSYOPs professional called Paul Tilley, and they were one of the key implementing companies of the Foreign Office information warfare operations in Syria. And so Valen, they are, I guess it's where now it's now he's kind of honed his craft, and is kind of is a kind of known supplier of,
like the go-to guy or something.
Yeah. He's kind of grifting, and he probably has a large number of government contacts that he or elite contacts that he exploits for his own purposes. So essentially Valent is in charge of this particular campaign. But I think it's worth emphasizing what a incestuous sphere this is. So he counts as a client this kind of neocon think tank called the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, which researches which was originally researched alleged terrorism and drivers of Islamic extremism, and is now heavily focused on alleged extremism within the anti-vax circles, and at the start of December last year published a report which suggested that the anti-lockdown protesters represented a terrorist threat, which is just so extraordinarily dishonest and alarmist, and this, that, and the other, that it's very it's kind of unconscionable. But the point is that he counts as a client. They're pushing this narrative around COVID. They convened a podcast in April 2020, way back, on countering disinformation over the course of the pandemic. So again, this has been I would suggest that there's been an attempt to frame the narrative from day one that the pandemic's been rife for disinformation, when actually before any evidence that this was the case had actually emerged, they were very, very, very heavily pushing this idea and trying to convince everyone that you need to trust the experts, and you need to whoever they are at that given moment.
I should mention that this was addressed and practiced and in the simulations as well. The Event 201, the Crimson, I forget. All I can think of is Crimson Tide, but that's not it. So,
but what's really, so just on that point, what I find really interesting as well is that I've read a lot of the literature that was published by, for my sins, a lot of the literature that was published by behavioral scientists over the course of the pandemic. And at the very start, and then they were all calling very aggressively for a widespread use of kind of PSYOPs and building up fear, and kind of covert communications campaigns to counter. And there's some incredibly juicy stuff that emerges from so many of these kind of documents. But then one of the things that I find really incredible was there seemed to be no apparent consideration of the fact that this was going to massively damage trust in in governments. This was going to be an absolute disaster.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so it's just like they're all for saying we need to set up kind of fake website, or we need to set up information. They don't use those phrases, but we need to set up kind of quietly set up public information resources around the pandemic, and that we need to up the sense of personal threat, and we need but then we need to offset this with easing restrictions at opportune junctures can be a good way of boosting trust in the government, and it's so incredibly cynical from day one, and no consideration of the fact that that if it emerges that these kind of techniques are being used, then people might be even more distrusting
Yeah.
There might be even more, and it's like that. There's a British journalist called Laura Dodsworth who's written and it was really interesting. She wrote this book called State of Fear, which was very prescient about how the UK government weaponized, fear and all manner of kind of psychological techniques over the course of the pandemic, which there was a huge establishment effort to suppress this with it got I think almost apart from maybe one in mainstream outlet, it got universally terrible reviews, like people attacking her like a character and saying that it was all a load of conspiracy theory mumbo jumbo. I mean, quite pleasingly, it became a bestseller because people, I think a lot of people,
Streisand effect or whatever.
Yeah, but not only that, but I think that a lot of people had, they had this sense that there's all sorts of things that happened over the course of the pandemic that they thought were quite suspicious, but they couldn't really put their finger on. And it's like, they wondered why this stuff. They didn't know quite what was happening, but they sensed that something was up, and I think that this provided a lot of answers to them, because that there's all. I'm not sure. Again, I wouldn't expect your listeners in the US to be aware of this, but at the very start I'm talking about the very start, there was this campaign called Clap for Carers, which essentially it was people would go out onto their balconies or go outside their homes and kind of.
We had something like that here too.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would imagine that there was probably something like that in the US, or at least some US states, where people would clap for the NHS workers who were, and it was enormously effective. And it started with, one Twitter, who had about, 20 followers or something at the time, she just said, I'm going to go outside and clap for the NHS staff. And then within days, this had been endorsed, I think even by the royal family, actually, interestingly. And it, various celebrities had come forward, and it became this national phenomenon for a period. And there have been various attempts after it kind of fizzled out when the lockdown ended in the UK, I think it was June, or I think it was July, that there were numerous attempts to kind of reheat it, which kind of failed. And I think that actually quite a lot of people look at it as quite an embarrassing thing. I mean, and at the time, I could sense what was up, because it was being broadcast live on the BBC every Thursday, I believe it was, and it's just like, well, that wouldn't happen if this was just this is literally the British state broadcaster telling you what to do. And it's about subtle level, this kind of sense of national unity, it's that kind of that classic logical fallacy around, you support the troops, don't you?
Yeah.
It's like, I don't not support them, I don't want them to die, and so therefore you become pro-war. It's that same kind of if you're not clapping, then you are, an enemy of the NHS, and by extension, an enemy of the government and the public. And it's like, it was enormously successful in terms of, one of many, many ways in which criticism around, of the government's, handling of the pandemic was
peer pressure
was suppressed. And it's like, irrespective of what your position is on COVID, the UK managed to have a national lockdown which ensured utter misery for an enormous number of people, while also it allegedly has by far the highest number of COVID deaths in Europe. So whether you view COVID-19 as a problem or not, by any measure, it was a shocking failure. But there was not a trace of criticism in mainstream media, or indeed even amongst. This is another point as well I'd like to make, is that I think that one of the reasons that this Valiant Project operation is so insidious, I think it represents, as I mentioned, there's been a wider push to frame any and all opposition to lockdowns or restrictions or mandates or vaccinations as inherently extremist, and it's meant that an enormous number of kind of anti-establishment dissident voices, journalists, campaigners, have been completely silent and actually unquestioned, at least publicly, about whether there's a wider agenda in all this and where it all could be headed, because they don't want to be tarred with the same brush. They don't want to be
exactly.
And this is the thing, is that I find it is that, like, you know, I'm by no means, you know, anti-vaccination. I remember very well in the UK, there was a huge scandal over, you know, MMR injections for children, which was, you know, on the you know, false basis that this led to, you know, autism and all these other kind of conditions and afflictions in children. And, you know, I remember, you know, that, you know, I remember thinking it was nonsense at the time. I actually got you know, 2 Moderna shots, largely so I could travel, but also because of, you know, kind of sense of like, well, if it does stop transmission and it stops me getting ill and it stops, you know, then it's, you know, a potentially good thing. But then equally, you know, I mean, I very much opposed, you know, mandatory vaccination, let alone, you know, kind of vaccine passes, which we could get into. But you know, the space to say, right, well, I believe that COVID is real, but I'm also against this being exploited for the purposes of surveillance and social control. Yeah. Which it's, you know, has been, and, you know, this will become turbocharged if digital IDs are tied to vaccine passes, which seems almost inevitable now. That you know, whenever I have a conversation,
and digital currencies.
Oh God, yeah. And whenever I have a conversation with you know, even with like friends and family, like sometimes I have to engage in this very, very long kind of self-justification. It's like, well, you know, I'm not anti-vax. But equally, I'm not in any way supportive, and in fact, I'm actually very frightened about where this is potentially and indeed likely leading. And the space to do that is almost non-existent, because the second that you set, people have been so programmed at this point by propaganda such as this Violent Projects campaign, that the second they hear someone say, oh, well, you know, really should children be wearing masks in school, the average person thinks, right, like QAnon, lunatic, like, you know, like, you know, you support David Icke, like you think Bill Gates is trying to like inject your grandma with, you know, microchips and stuff, and it's just like, it's just not true. But it's that kind of dog whistle thing.
Yeah.
Again, it's similar to and this is what's really funny, was that like the people who push this kind of who push these kind of narratives, it often backfires on them. So there was I won't bother naming him, doesn't deserve it, but there's a kind of fairly prominent Russia watcher on who's written a few kind of books about how awful, evil, and criminal the, you know, Russians and the Russian government all are, and you know how it's all KGB and blah blah. And like, he was a, you know, prominent on Twitter. He made a, you know, kind of a seeming career out of attacking anyone who was offering kind of sober, like, you know, takes on, you know,
say, they probably came after me at some point.
Anyone who was like kind of, you know, suggesting that, oh, well, actually we should probably try and get on with, you know, this major nuclear armed power, and actually they're not, you know, we do, you know, we have relationships with far worse governments and groups all over the world, and that, you know, actually maybe they're not the kind of source of all evil in the world, and they're not, for, you know, kind of meddling in all these elections. You know, he would brand them, you know, useful idiots, Kremlin stooges, you know, blah 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 blah, and like this, and you know, he would lead these kind of, you know, online kind of, you know, dog piles and charges at people who were offering, you know, kind of reasonable, you know, rational middle ground takes on various issues related to Russia. And then, like, you know, the other day I saw someone calling him an agent of Putin and saying he serves Kremlin interests. I just thought it was so funny, because like, this is someone who, like, yeah, is like kind of responsible for circulating all these like insane conspiracy theories about how, like, you know, Russia's gonna, you know, invade Kazakhstan and annex it, restart the Soviet Union, and the kind of like that scene in The Simpsons where like they flip the sign from Russia to the Soviet Union and the Berlin Wall pops back up, and then it's like, here he is being accused of it. And it's the same with, it was the same a lot with the, you know, it became very de rigueur to accuse Jeremy Corbyn and all manner of kind of, you know, opponents of, you know, Israel's criminal genocidal policies in the occupied territories as anti-Semitic. And then it's like, you know, that was about neutralizing kind of troublesome, you know, dissident voices. And then now it's increasingly being turned on, you know, establishment figures as well, because, you know, they're being accused of being.
Well, I mean, that's the cautionary tale for the people who cheer when their political enemies get banned.
Oh God,
That is the cautionary tale, because
this is the problem on the left as well that I noticed, that it's
big time. Yeah.
really extraordinary. So it was like this. It was like when Donald Trump got banned from Twitter, and then I think it was the head of World Socialist website. And I think that they put out some good content,
But they went haywire recently.
Yeah, they went haywire. But they were claiming that in the wake of this, the head of the World Socialist website was saying, Trump's banning is in no way a kind of, a bad day for free speech. He deserved to go. It's not a what's the word? It's not something that we should care about, and actually we should be, celebrating this. And then days later, he got banned, and then he's like going on as if it's like this Orwellian encroachment of civil society. And it's just like, but this is what happens, is that when you support censorship of one thing, then something or someone you like will be censored. It's like, it's that what will you do when the devil turns around on you?
I know.
And it's just like, and it's amazing to me that just like how people don't get this. And it's like, I've seen it so many times when, like, I mean, I think these social media platforms, they often go for the kind of low hanging fruit. They go for like those quite obviously awful, nasty people. And then when they get taken down, people are like, yeah, but then it's like, oh, actually, then, yeah, this page I actually like also got banned forever with no recourse. And it's just like, well, I mean, what do you expect?
Yeah, they ease some policy in using, a target that no one can defend, or it's, very hard to defend.
Yeah.
But then, it's not too long before they're coming for you. I mean, come on, wake up. Don't be a dumbass. Not you. I'm just talking about people in general.
Well, I do need to be reminded of that quite often. But to be fair,
I mean, you get worked up, and I know. But it's one of those things that's hard. And I think Glenn Greenwald is a good person for that kind of topic, of sort of reminding people of that, and sort of sticking to the principles, which is always hard to do. But on some things, like, you really have to. Even in the moment, it may seem like the right thing to do, to support some taking down some terrible thing, but if in the process, you're killing free speech and things like that, and setting kind of precedents that, if you have any sense, and if you have any knowledge of history, that it's going to come back to bite you, then please, learn from that.
I think that the amnesia that people the amnesia that people have about this stuff is really extraordinary. And it's just like, it's kind of it's numbing and depressing. And it's just like, you see it. I'm sure that, I mean, we're long overdue some kind of large scale covert or over Western intervention, in the Middle East, or maybe Africa, maybe Ethiopia next. But it's just like, each and every time people fall for this same kind of regime change script, or is it? You see it with the Uyghurs in China. I've no doubt that they're being, they are subject to forms of repression, and that, like, that them and fundamentally, China's presence there is, imperialist, because they are occupying, they're effectively occupying, a territory that was, at least at one point, outside their borders. But anyway, that's by the by, and it's not, a subject I'm particularly an expert on. But it's just like, you see so many people on like, or even on the left, who are kind of, dissident, who will oppose, say, US attempts to destabilize Venezuela, and will dismiss, claims of human rights abuses being perpetrated by Cuba, say, but then they are rabidly and aggressively sharing all this stuff about how awful the government crackdown in Hong Kong is. And it's like, but do you not see it's the same thing? It's the same script, it's the same techniques, it's the same organizations, the same agencies, the same people, usually, actually, who are pushing this.
Well, that's the important part of this story, right? Is that the same people, but certainly the same overall plans and techniques that are used to sell war are now being repurposed and aimed at the domestic audiences, right?
Yeah.
So that is one of the biggest points, despite all the, really important and interesting stuff in this article. I mean, that was my big takeaway. And you got no and about, you were talking about how that author, they attacked the messenger. So as far as I know, I don't know up to today what responses you may have gotten, but so at the time of the article, the only response you got was from Amil Khan, right? And he immediately went after you. He went after you personally. He says you're going by a certain name, so this is a pseudonym, or putting doubt as to whether you are who you say you are, and you're a Russian info ops person, and then accuses. Well, first of all, he I guess admits that they were real documents, sort of, right? But he says that they were manipulated, but never gave any specifics, right?
Yeah, it's just, I mean, this is things. It's so classic. This is exactly what we saw with the Intentionist leaks. Was first that it's funny that within a single tweet he managed to engage several different approaches that I found from people who were named in the Intentionist document. So I obviously, when these leaked in December 2018 or November 2018, I started emailing everyone who was named, and then the responses ranged from, oh, these documents are fake, they're completely, they're not real, you've been duped, to how have you got these, you're not meant to have them, I'm going to sue you, or I'm going to report you to the police. And so he claimed, and Amil Khan stated, oh well, these clearly have been doctored, and then also saying that he was going to set his lawyers on me. And it's like, but if they're fake, then why would you do that? And it's just like, he's conducted numerous character attacks on me. And it's funny that for someone who claims to be this, this is, pretty part of the course for disinformation researchers, for someone who claims to be an expert on online influence operations, he first tried claiming that my profile photo on Twitter wasn't real. And that, yes, as you say, that I was this kind of, that I was a fake online persona, and then also made all of these bizarre allegations saying that I'd written for Serbian ultra nationalist websites, which is just not, it's so untrue. It's not even wrong. I mean, I can't even speak or write or read Serbian. So quite how I've written for one of these, such a website I don't know. Unless there's some kind of Tyler Durden situation going on, it was just all of these really bizarre charges, and about how he was subject to troll attacks that were presumably orchestrated by the Kremlin. But it's just like, I mean, are these not real people who are just kind of shocked and appalled at what you're doing? It's just, it was so standard. And I think that ultimately the fact that we've received no substantive rebuttal to anything that we said in the article. Some people attacked us for certain language, or the way that they claim that we the way that they think or claim we framed a particular statement made by a person. It's just very, very kind of low level, very very, very weak, thin,
not sophisticated, which you would expect it to be.
And it's just like, I mean, ultimately no one has challenged the substance of the article in any serious way, or shown how we were wrong, or anything false that we said. And actually, one thing I have actually found quite encouraging in this era of intense fracture, and you mentioned Glenn Greenwald. He posted something very instructive the other day, which was he said that the left and right have become so, both mainstream and Indian, all have become so fractured, so kind of what's the word? They've become
polarized.
That's the word. Sorry, they've become so polarized that they just don't have the same facts on anything. So it's impossible to have a constructive conversation. Because
nor do they trust the facts from the other side.
And it's just like, we live in a world where if any, as Amil Khan demonstrated, if someone says something that you don't like, or doesn't cohere with your pre-existing biases and prejudices, then it's fake or wrong. And if you push back against this, you can block them. and like then claim that you've like somehow secured some victory by token of doing this. But like one thing I did find quite heartening was we had an enormous number of people reach out to us who people who disagreed with our positions on many things, or felt that actually were very much in favor of non-medical interventions like lockdown, who said that they found our article incredibly revealing and illuminating and thought-provoking. And I think it is worth trying to do this because there's that cliche, which is actually very true, that more connects us than divides us. And if we're serious about actually opposing state power, which these bread tube people are not, and they are concerned with trying to end opposition to state power. If we are actually, if we believe in civil liberties, and we're opposed to manipulation and lies and indeed conflict, then we should actually band together, because these forces are arrayed against us because we are strong, at least potentially. That's why, as you say, they invest such enormous financial and practical and technical resources in trying to mislead us and suppress us, because an informed population is a very dangerous thing indeed.
Yeah, I'm gonna come back to some of those points in our bonus question, but I do want to mention one more thing for people who haven't gotten through this article yet. The another layer, if you will, this paragraph where you say the challenging pseudoscience operation designed for Thorne was launched in February 2021 by liberal science journalist Angela, is it Saini?
Yeah, Angela Saini, yes.
Angela Saini,
yes.
The author of several popular titles and a forthcoming book on the origins of patriarchy. She's also a part of the Lancet COVID-19 Commission's task force on global health diplomacy, and the commission's chief is Peter Daszak, the zoologist, and I think everybody knows who Peter Daszak is by now.
Yes.
So this is getting stranger and stranger in terms of its connections. I just wondered if you had any comment on that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that
what role did Angela Saini play, actually?
I mean, I think that she's actually quite a small fish in all this. I mean, but I just think that it's just a testament to the. I mean, I wanted to go bigger on this in the piece, but for purposes of space, we made the executive decision to reduce this kind of a tangent. But yeah, I mean, I just think that I've written about this, and I think it's funny that I was I as it so often happens, if I may be so bold, I was so ahead of the curve on this, because I actually wrote way back at the end of last year and at the end of 2020 and the start of 2021. And so it's amazing how these years just merge into one another.
Yeah, they do.
During the pandemic, it's 2019 last week in my mind in many ways.
I know.
The point is that Peter Daszak is just it's staggeringly ubiquitous in so in the years leading up to the pandemic. He's working on bat coronaviruses and gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and he's doing this for the Pentagon's Defense Threat Reduction Agency, which is is about allegedly countering weapons of mass destruction, or it's probably about creating them. And in December 2019, he warns that coronaviruses can get into human cells very easily, and you can manipulate them in a lab very easily, and you can't vaccinate against them. But then suddenly, in February, I think it was February or March in 2020, he writes this kind of open letter for the esteemed British medical journal, The Lancet, in which he basically talks at length about dismissing alleged conspiracy theories around the virus, and saying there's no way this could have escaped from a lab. And then he's part of the World Health Organization's team that actually visits Wuhan, and then they determine that a lab leak is the least likely explanation. Even the WHO director said that this aspect of the report was, very poor, and it needed to be reinvestigated. And then he gets promoted to the Lancet's COVID-19 Commission task force and is running it. And it's like, this is like conflict of interest upon conflict of interest. I mean, he finally has managed to, he's finally been displaced and forced to stand down. And that was in June last year.
This has all fallen apart since, but it held up for quite a while. Yeah.
And it's just like, it's just absolutely extraordinary. And then now we're getting more and more emails which are being secured via FOI, which are indicating that Dasak was coordinating with very powerful figures in the US and kind of international health establishment, and that all of these officials like Fauci were doing their absolute best to suppress any and all critical discussion about the origins of this virus. There was just yesterday, some House Republicans released a series of emails where it showed that he'd been contacted by a number of it showed that Fauci had been contacted by a number of what's the word?
Scientists?
Epidemiologists and virologists who are all saying that they laying out really coherent substantive reasons why they thought that this was a lab leak. And Fauci was on one hand losing it, but then he's talking to the NIH director, Francis Collins, and they're talking about ways to counter this narrative that it was emerged from the lab. And Fauci in one email says, he says, well, we can only hope this problem will go away in time, quote unquote. It's just like, it's extraordinary that that you would go to, allegedly, if you're a scientist and B, concerned with the truth, particularly in a time of enormous kind of a public health crisis, that you would be so determinedly concerned with discrediting and suppressing serious discussion around this thing's origins. And it's like, why? And it's such an obvious question, and which has never been satisfactorily resolved. And I think that actually, public inquiries and commissions often don't get to the truth on these things. But I think that if we were to have, it works differently in the UK, but if we were to have a kind of a US kind of maybe a Senate or congressional inquiry where witnesses can be called and required to testify under oath. And documents can be subpoenaed and turned over, then I think that we're actually going to a very, very, very interesting picture could emerge. And I think the stuff like countering pseudoscience as violent projects, psychological operation, it is just one strand of a kind of a myriad, a vast international myriad, which was all about, actually, rather than countering pseudoscience, was about countering any and all alternative explanations or perspectives on, exactly. And it's all falling apart now as well. So it's like in the UK, where the liberal media was over Omicron, was absolutely begging the government and very much pressuring the UK government to impose another lockdown over Christmas and New Year, which didn't happen. And there hasn't been, a vast uptick in hospitalizations and deaths as far as one can see. Although, I know people have caught it and it's often not been particularly pleasant for them. But it's just like, the Guardian the other day, having published all of these editorials saying that, the government must act now on Omicron, I had this actually fairly balanced interview with a public health scientist who said that lockdowns were an absolute disaster. And that he
said this in the Guardian.
Yeah, and that targeted interventions would have done a much better job and resulted in much less misery for average people. And it's like, I think that when clearly the tide is turning, and it's going to be interesting to see what comes over the next year, because I what kind of inconvenient truths might emerge, and indeed, which public health officials are going to and government ministers all over the world are going to end up in court for, one would hope many, but there'll probably be a few sacrificial lambs, and that will be it.
We can still be cynical and optimistic. That's my
Yes.
challenge in life, is to try to balance those two things.
My position is that, I'm an optimist, as depressing as that is. But
yeah, I mean, I just noticed that I put a note in my notes here to mention to you that, I told you that I just sampled some of the Philosophy Tube content because I had not seen it before, and I wrote down, Philosophy Tube seems like Sesame Street for young politically minded adults, which you had mentioned. Sesame Street is just a little ad hoc. I got to let you go, but
yes,
I just want to wrap this up with a bonus question, more of an opinion kind of thing. So, after we talked about all of this, trust in, one thing that really worries me is, a lot of us have invested a lot of our time and effort in independent media, and this kind of discrediting, this kind of thing, it's going to make people doubt everything they see, right? Oh, are they working with some kind of covert operation or whatever? So that's concerning. Also, but also the bigger picture is like, how can people develop a strategy? This is for like informed and interested listeners. Like, how do you decide? I guess there's two parts to this question. As people, part of the independent media, like you and I are, what do we do to go forward? We can't just like navel gaze and constantly try to, convince people that we're not sold out, but for listeners as well, and for us as listeners, how do you go about making a good judgment? How do you try to have good analysis and assess sources, and when we know this kind of thing is going on, and some of the most credible, believable, trustworthy people, they're going to be targets, because the power elite, if you will, I mean, they're like credibility and trust vampires. They're going to go after people who do have an audience who they trust. So, everybody has a price, I would guess. So if you would just give me some thoughts as to like maybe what your strategy is as a writer and as a consumer of media, particularly independent media. Visit aroundtheempire.com to find the various ways that you can gain access to the bonus content, join the Discord community, and participate in the periodic Zoom calls where we talk among ourselves. I hope that some of you will join us, and now we'll continue with the wrap-up. Kit, need to let you go. Thank you for spending all this time.
That's all right.
Take a second to tell everybody where they can find your work, because you write for a few different places.
Yeah, sure. You can find me on Twitter, which is just Kit Clarenberg. It's just at Kit Klarenberg. And then in my bio, there's a link to my Substack. That's a really good way of keeping up to date with the kind of stuff that I'm working on. I'll be posting exclusive content there, but also links to my articles, various places. You can find my bio lines all over: Electronic Intifada, Grayzone, RT.
Cradle, did I see you in the Cradle too?
Yeah, the Cradle, yeah, and with any luck, I'll be writing for even more places over the next year. It could actually be quite, particularly given that things seem to be opening up at last, and indeed in a kind of enduring way. I think it's going to be actually quite an active and exciting year. So stay tuned, and I hope to see you there.
Good. Thanks so much. Talk to you soon, and thanks again.
Cheers, Joanne. Cheers.
Thanks for listening. Special thanks to Kit Klarenberg. Follow him on Twitter at Kit Klarenberg, and follow his work on his Substack. This is a fully independent podcast. In this age of censorship, your support's more important than ever. Go to the website aroundtheempire.com to find the various ways that you can get access to bonus content, other platforms, the various platforms, and to support the show. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and leave reviews. That helps. Follow on Twitter at Around the Empire. Join us on Telegram, t.me/aroundtheempire, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everybody. Stay strong.